5 things to consider before you buy your first e-bike. Let's chop it up. We will again be out on the K6 Pro Max. As you can see, I've changed the seat. After 260 something miles on the stock seat, I'm starting to understand why some people have issues with it. And after my last off-road ride, I'm very much still feeling it. And I have a little theory as to why this Cloud 9 seat is perhaps better. And it has to do with this shape right here. The way that this is curved upward. Is that that's convex or concave is like this. Yeah, right? So this would be convex. And then the stock seat is concaved. It's in a V. And so I'm thinking my back is being pressed down, and then there's no suspension on the bottom of the stock seat. It's just got the flimsy outer sides. And so it's not a lot of support for my back from that stock seat. But so far I've noticed with this Cloud 9, again, with it being raised and having suspension, it's providing a lot more support for my lower back than the original stock seat. So yeah, I think for me, that's a worthy modification. As to what else I plan to do with this bike, I do need to get this throttle looked at. The bike is off right now, but it's not always snapping back fully. And sometimes if it doesn't go all the way back, it'll interfere with the torque sensor. And so I'm either gonna get a full throttle, I don't know, because knowing me, I'll send the whole bike flying into the bushes. But I do want to look at replacing that or seeing what I can do to get that full spring back. Everything else is up here is doing good to go. Nothing else that you haven't seen before. If you've seen this bike before, I've added the turn signals, this bag, phone holder, and my chain. This trunk bag is likely going to be getting replaced soon. One of the things I want to do is get a pannier bag. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And then have a little cushion, and then I'm going to get a second battery to put on top so I can get a lot more range. That'll be effectively 60 amp hours of range. And there's other places that I'll be able to go and do some day camping and stuff like that. Again, I mentioned in the last video, catching cooks and so on. And I did mention in the last ride along that I want to replace this 125 millimeter shock. I want to get something that's a lot more springy. Even though, again, I'm doing a lot of off-road riding, I need a little bit more cushion because of my back issues. But other than that, this bike is great. I do need to put it in my little garage. I need to get all this dirt and stuff cleaned out, clean off the brake parts, make sure the chain is clean. I mean, I've been mixing it up in a lot of mud and dirt, so yeah, I want to do a little maintenance on it so I can keep it running. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the 5 things you should consider before buying one of these bad boys or any other e-bike. All right, let's go. I was just here having a drink and I couldn't help but notice the scent of these honeysuckles. Smells really good right here. In spite of the garbage can. And I just want to start by saying that I'm not in any way an e-bike expert. I'm just coming to you as one consumer to another who's gone through the experience of buying a few e-bikes over the past few months. So I just want to share what I've learned in that process, and if you're looking for your first e-bike, maybe this might help you. And all this is going to fall under the umbrella of do your own research, because that's effectively what this is all pointing to. I'm just kind of offering some guidance on the type of research you can be doing and some of the things that you should focus on. There's going to be more things, and if there are other things that you're aware of, please feel free to share those in the comments. All right, so number one thing would be the company itself. And what I mean is, do they own their own factory? Are they a manufacturer? Are they a company that just buys bulk amounts of bikes from another factory and puts their own label on it? You know, if they're even less than that, are they a company that just buys lower quantities of bikes and doesn't have enough business to support their own presence or anything, so they don't even slap a label on some of these bikes? And that's why, again, I mentioned this in the DTT-ZH A12 review, that you see a lot of bikes that look exactly the same but have different names. You know, maybe slightly different designs or slightly different components. It's often because these companies are, you know, white label or even no label companies that are just reselling someone else's bike effectively, maybe at a lower cost because of lower overhead. And what you really want to know in this process is, does this company have a warranty? Will they be around in a year or two to honor it? What's their return policy like? You just want to make sure that you're getting your bike from, well, I would say you would be well advised to get a bike from a company that's going to be around to help you if you need servicing or, again, repairs or returns. So number two goes along with number one, and that's what their customer support is like. Of course, you haven't bought the bike yet, but you have every right to reach out to them, send them an email, see what their response time is like, if they respond at all. Know what your experience is going to be like before you get into a relationship with this company, with this, you know, several $100 purchase that you're considering making. There are companies that have retail locations where you can get your bike serviced. That could mean a lot to a lot of people. So that's something good to know before you dive into that ocean. So number three, I'd say, what's your purpose for getting the bike? Because that's going to determine not only the type of bike you get, but the components on that bike. Your needs as a commuter are going to be different than if you like to ride with your hair on fire off-road. So for example, if you're a commuter and let's say you live on somewhere where it's relatively flat, you might only need a 36 or a 48 volt bike with 500 or 750 watt battery. But perhaps if you want to do more exploration and things like that, maybe you want something with a 52 volt battery. And if you're just a speed demon, then something with 60 or 72 volts might suit your fancy. Maybe you want to do a lot of off-road riding, and then that opens you up to considering bikes with dual motors. Or if not dual motors, maybe you don't want an e-bike at all and you want an e-moto. You know, something Saran style or something like that, which is a completely different category of vehicle. Those are not e-bikes. Or maybe you want to get your e-bike for exercise, and that's where you want to consider something with a torque sensor versus a cadence sensor. And it's not that you can't get exercise with a bike that has a cadence sensor, but a torque sensor gives you that more natural pedaling experience, and that you can pedal at lower speeds and more casual speeds without the motor jerking you forward at the maximum speed for that pedal assistance setting. But with all of these considerations, you want to think about your battery size, your amp hours. Because if you are going to be flying around at 30, 40 plus miles an hour, then you're gonna want something that has more than 20 amp hours, or else your day won't last long. But again, if you're on relatively flat terrain and you're gonna be doing a lot of pedaling, then maybe you can get one of those 12 amp hour batteries. I kind of laugh when I see those. I just personally don't expect to get much out of batteries that size. For me, the minimum at this point is now 25, 30. But in any case, I would ignore whatever the mileage claims are that the companies are telling you, because those are all going to vary based on each individual. It's going to vary based on the person's size, their weight, their height. And so the key thing is to know that your voltage times your amp hours is the total watt hours. And that's the overall size of the battery. It's like the overall capacity, like the gas tank. And the smaller that number, anything under 1,000, you're looking at a very small battery, in my opinion. So again, just think about that when you're looking at all these bikes. You might see a great bike and it looks like something fun to bop around with, and then you see that it has 22 amp hours, and you're gonna get about 30 minutes of enjoyment at the speeds that you wanna ride it. Okay, number 4, let's talk about storage. Because e-bikes ain't small and they're not light. But yeah, let's talk about where you're gonna put it. Are you gonna put it in your house, in your home, in your apartment, your condo, your townhouse, in your garage? Is it gonna be on a balcony? Is it gonna be inside? Are you gonna have to carry it when you bring it inside because your wife doesn't want you rolling it across the rug? You have to consider how much you can lift. Some of these bikes are in excess of 100 pounds. That alone ruled out some very good bikes that I was considering, like the Testway X7 and others. Also, how much space do you have wherever you plan to put it? And that might determine whether or not you want to get a foldable or even a compact bike. I have a compact folding bike that I keep in my trunk. When I need to go someplace far, I just bring the battery with me just in case, and I have an automatic launch. I should ride that bike more, but because there are so many hills where I live, I mean like steep hills, even though that bike has a 1,000-watt motor, I just like using this one more. Again, no shade on that A12. I love that little thing. But yeah, where you're gonna put it might determine the type of bike you get. You might not want to get a 26-inch wheel bike if you have one bedroom situation, or in a shared, what I mean is if you're like sharing a place and all you have is one bedroom, it's going to take up a lot of space in that room. So just things like that. And then, are there steps to where the final destination is going to be? Maybe you bring it in the house on the ground level, but you've got to bring it up 1 or 2 flights to get it into your domicile or whatever, into your bedroom, wherever you're going to put it. The introduction of steps to an e-bike will ultimately determine how much you ride it. I noticed that with the very first one that I got. And so after a few rides, I went to Home Depot, bought myself a board, a hinge, and some nuts and bolts, and made a ramp that I just put up in our condo building when I get back from my ride. I don't leave it up or anything. I mentioned it to one of the guys who does reviews, because I saw him lifting up one of those e-motos up the steps. I'm like, oh, that looks back-breaking. And I put in the comments, hey, have you considered a ramp? And he mentioned that he lived in an apartment. And I think he mentioned that thinking that I was suggesting something permanent. But no, I get back, I keep the ramp right behind the door. As soon as I get back, I park the bike, go upstairs, pull out the ramp. It takes a minute or less. Put that down and then boom. Especially with this dual motor e-bike, it helps with getting the whole thing up with very minimal effort from me. And those were some of the things that I had to think about when I bought this bike and when I settled on this bike. This bike fits me for so many different reasons because I did a lot of research before I bought it. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5 is, what will you do when something breaks? Assuming the bike is out of warranty, you might have to change flat tires. You know, in that case, maybe you just recall the skills that you developed when you were a kid. It'll come back just like riding the bike did. But you know, you might get into more complex things like servicing brakes, bleeding brakes and that. Then you got to think about, can you do it yourself? Do you have the tools, the skills? Or do you want to pay someone else? And something to consider with e-bikes is that they have limited repair shops as compared to regular bicycles. So again, all things to consider. I know YouTube is a wealth of information, but you've got to match that information with your skill sets, your abilities, which the average person, I think, wouldn't have any problems with. But you have a lot of seniors getting into e-bikes. And so if you're a senior, this is something that you might want to consider even more. Just even going beyond assembling the bike itself. Because that's a 30 to 60 minute operation with a lot of bending over, sitting down, standing up. So a lot to consider before you buy one of these absolutely fun and incredible vehicles. Okay, so that was 5, but I got a couple bonuses that I want to throw in there. And the first bonus consideration is e-bike influencers. Now, don't get me wrong, they're a great resource for learning about e-bikes and maybe the specific e-bike that you want to get. But understand that companies send, for the most part, these influencers e-bikes in exchange for videos. Maybe sometimes you'll notice that on a given day, like 4 or 5 videos of the same bike get released, and then you start seeing them trickle in over the next couple days. It's because these companies coordinate those efforts with those influencers. And nothing wrong with that, right? I'm not throwing shade on the process because I benefited from that process. And again, I'm not throwing shade on that. What I'm suggesting to you is to get different perspectives so that you can get your own opinion based on the different perspectives that are out there. If you just watch one video and that one influencer says that bike is fantastic, you might get that bike and it not work for you for many different reasons. You know, when you see different influencers, you see big guys, you see small guys, you see women, you know, you see bigger women, smaller women. So you can, again, get a different perspective based on who you are and who is going to best represent that bike to you, or a combination of folks, whatever it is I'm trying to say. But yeah, just be in mind that, just bear in mind that not all of these reviews are 100% objective, because again, they're relying on that relationship to continue, which in my opinion is a pretty cool relationship to have, you know. And for what I've seen, I think these guys are objective. The guys that I watch, I've mentioned them on this channel, and there are others. But unfortunately, sometimes there aren't a lot of videos on the bike you want. as is the case with this one I'm riding now, the K6 Pro Max. So I've been trying to put out a lot of content showing this bike in different circumstances as a heavier rider, 6'3", 230, so that at least for those who are interested in this particular one, because I'm not an e-bike influencer, you know, I just review products that I buy. And so at least if anyone's interested in this bike, well, at least I have several videos that people can see. So again, no shade on e-bike influencers whatsoever. They do help in the process, and I think they're necessary to the process. I'm just advising you as a consumer to get an objective and as objective opinion as you can. Bonus consideration number 2, that's laws. You should understand the laws where you plan to ride. Not only will it defend you against busybodies, it'll also defend you against the law and getting your bike impounded. So even though you might see influencers breaking the law, literally, don't let that influence how you ride your bike. Use your own discernment, common sense, and reason to ride responsibly where you are and be an advocate for the recreation. Because there are so many people who are giving it such a bad name, all for that mighty dollar. And children are literally getting broken up and in some cases killed as a result. So please be responsible. You know, there's a lot of talk about laws regarding how much watts you're allowed to have. You know, 750 watts is the max. From my experience so far, discerning cops are more concerned about behavior than they are the size of the motor or what components you have on the bike. You know, it's like a cop sees a Corvette and a Honda Accord at a light. He's not worried about the fact that the Corvette can go much faster than that Accord. He's worried about whether or not that Accord breaks the speed limit or not. So I would say, as far as those laws are concerned, hopefully with the proper advocacy and, you know, so forth, we'll be able to lobby for common sense laws that govern behavior and not what you decide to put on your bike. So that wraps up the considerations that I had. I would say, in addition to those things, some things to look for, you know, as you look for your bike, depending on how you ride, you're going to want a cadence sensor versus a torque sensor, or vice versa, hydraulic versus mechanical brakes, what kind of suspension you want. Do you need it to be adjustable? Do you need it to be full front and rear? And something I would highly advise is to get a bike, or at least battery, that is UL certified, because that will help you when it comes to any insurance claims, or even the ability to get insurance, homeowners or renters insurance. So that's something to consider. And then, you know, are you buying a bike that is part of an enclosed ecosystem? Because I would recommend buying something that has easily replaceable parts. You know, because if you get a closed ecosystem bike and something goes wrong with that company, you know, you could end up in a situation with whatever company that was, where people were basically cannibalizing each other's bikes for parts because they couldn't get them on the market. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. All right, folks, well, that's all I have for now. If you stuck around this long, I do thank you very, very much. And again, feel free to add anything to the list in the comments. But whether or not you're riding a regular bike or scooter, a motorcycle, an e-bike, or even just a walk, or if you're in a mobility device, I hope that you can get out and enjoy the great outdoors. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.